Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. The day I moved into my dream home, I found strangers swimming in my private pool, led by a woman who claimed it belonged to the HOA. What began as a trespass turned into a full-blown war of fake maps, lawsuits, and secrets that would tear the entire neighborhood apart. The day we moved into the new house, it felt like crossing a finish line barefoot, dragging a 12-year-old boy and a shipping container of emotional baggage behind me. The house itself, 2 stories of clean lines and matte stucco set back against the Arizona foothills, wasn't just a house. It was a severance package from my old life. A fresh start paid in full by years of overwork, one ugly divorce, and every last penny of my savings. I designed it myself, every inch of it, from the cantilevered sunshades to the infinity edge pool that stretched toward the dry horizon like it was trying to escape with me. I was unpacking boxes in the garage when Trevor, my son, came running inside. "Dad, there are people in the backyard," he said, wide-eyed. I thought maybe he meant landscapers. We'd hired a crew for cleanup during the build. But when I stepped out, what I saw was something else entirely. 2 women I'd never seen before were lounging beside the pool like it was a resort. One had already kicked off her sandals and dipped her feet in. 3 kids splashed in the shallow end, yelling like it was a birthday party. One of the women looked up at me and waved. I didn't wave back. "Hi there," she called cheerfully. "We figured we'd break in the neighborhood pool while it's still nice out." I blinked. "I'm sorry, this isn't a neighborhood pool. This is my private property." The woman with the short blonde bob stood up and put her hands on her hips like she was trying to summon a staff meeting. "You must be the new owner," she said. Karen Meadows, Sunrise Estates HOA president. She said it like it was supposed to mean something to me. We assumed, given the location, well, that this was part of the shared amenities. "I mean, you built it right next to our park." I walked down the steps slowly, trying to keep my tone even. "The park may be yours, ma'am, but this pool and this land are mine. I'm not part of Sunrise Estates. This parcel was subdivided decades ago." Karen squinted at me. "You're saying this isn't common property? That's ridiculous. It's literally touching our park trail." I pointed toward the corner of the property where a wrought iron fence separated my lot from the community park's trail access. "That's a trail easement. There's no shared access. You crossed through the landscaping gap where the service gate hasn't been installed yet." She crossed her arms. "Well, if it's such a big deal, maybe you shouldn't have built a pool right on the edge of a public space. It invites confusion." "No. What invites confusion is entitled strangers thinking they can trespass because they have lawn chairs and audacity." Karen's face flushed a tight shade of red. "There's no need to be rude. The kids just wanted a quick dip. The community has expectations of shared use. You'll find things go smoother if you embrace that." "I don't care about the community's expectations," I said. "This is not your HOA. This is my home. Please leave." That was when she pulled out her phone. "Fine, then show me your deed," she said. "I'll wait." I stared at her, genuinely stunned. "You want me to run inside and bring you my title documents on my first day here? Because you walked onto my property without permission." Karen held up her phone. "Or I can call the HOA legal office. We'll get this sorted out the formal way." That was when Trevor, still holding the box of charger cables I'd asked him to bring in, muttered loud enough for her to hear, "She's like a Disney villain, but with a gym membership." Karen either didn't hear or chose to ignore it. She turned to the other woman and said, "Let's go." But this isn't over. As they shuffled the kids out, one of them kicked a pool toy over the edge and onto the stone deck. I didn't pick it up. I watched them walk back along the trail and disappear around the curve where the HOA maintained lawn met the wild brush of my property's edge. That night, I installed the rest of the cameras and bolted the service gate shut. I double-checked the property line markers for good measure. The survey pins were still right where the county placed them last year, 15 feet from the park fence, exactly as planned. Still, I barely slept. 2 mornings later, I stepped outside with a mug of coffee in hand and nearly dropped it. There, zip-tied to the front gate, was a laminated sign that hadn't been there the night before. Bright blue Helvetica on a white background, it read, "Community Pool Access Under Review. Please inquire at Sunrise Estates HOA office." At first, I thought it was a prank, maybe some teenager with a laminator and too much time. But when I looked closer, I saw the Sunrise Estates HOA logo printed at the bottom. That stupid little sunburst they put on everything from lawn inspection notices to overly cheerful newsletters. I tore the sign down, marched back inside, and fired off 3 emails, one to the HOA email listed on their website, one to the local non-emergency police line, and one to a small local news blog that covered suburban nonsense like this. I even attached photos. By noon, no one had responded. By 2 p.m., I got a call from a soft-spoken officer named Deputy Langley. He was polite but clearly hesitant to get involved. "Sir, we can file an incident report," he said. But without footage or eyewitnesses, this could be chalked up as a miscommunication. "Funny," I said, "because there's only one person in this neighborhood so bold, delusional, and logo-happy enough to hang that kind of sign." I mentioned Karen Meadows by name. He sighed. Apparently, I wasn't the first person to call about her. "She's active," he said diplomatically. Around 4 p.m., as if summoned by spite and civic ego, a group of well-dressed retirees with clipboards appeared on the sidewalk across from my driveway. There were 5 of them, standing in a semicircle like a judgmental a cappella group. One of them launched a drone, an actual whirring camera-equipped drone, and started piloting it slowly over my backyard. I stormed out. "Hey," I shouted. "You can't fly that over my house without permission." One of the clipboard crew, a silver-haired man with mirrored sunglasses, replied smoothly, "HOA is conducting an amenities review. Visual documentation is standard protocol for disputed spaces." "There's no dispute," I said. "You have no jurisdiction here. This isn't your land." Another woman spoke up. "Karen said your property line is under review. The board has a right to assess encroachment." I didn't scream. I wanted to. Instead, I held up my phone and recorded the whole conversation. Then I turned around and walked straight back inside. I uploaded the video to the neighborhood Facebook group. Caption: Day 3 of living next to a cult. The reaction was nuclear. Within 2 hours, the post had over 70 comments. Some were HOA loyalists, of course. "He should have gone through proper channels. It's about neighborhood harmony. Don't build a pool on the edge of a park if you want privacy." But the majority were on my side. Residents who'd apparently been waiting for someone to call Karen out publicly. One guy posted a photo of his mailbox taped shut with a non-compliant color warning tag. Another woman commented, "She once threatened to fine me for putting a gnome in my front yard." A gnome. Still, I knew this wasn't over. That evening, just after sunset, Trevor and I were grilling dinner out back when I heard the clink of metal on metal. I walked around the side yard and found Karen again, this time with 3 kids and a younger couple, climbing through the gap in the landscaping that bordered the park trail. I flipped on the floodlights and said, calmly but loud enough for the neighbors to hear, "You are trespassing. You are on private property. Leave now." Karen turned slowly, her face frozen in a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "We thought we'd finish the swim we started the other day. My guests are from out of town. They were so charmed by your backyard." "Charmed?" I said. "This isn't a resort. This is my home. I didn't invite you here." One of the kids cannonballed into the shallow end before Karen even acknowledged me. That's when I said, "I have cameras. I have footage. I'm calling the police again." Karen scoffed. "You're being extremely hostile. This sort of attitude isn't neighborly. You don't want to make enemies of the HOA. You don't run this land, Karen. This isn't Sunrise Estates. This is mine." "You're mistaken," she snapped. "There's a long-standing boundary concern over this section. Your pool might not even be fully on your property." I blinked. "You're making that up." "We'll see," she said smugly. "The board has maps, records." I stepped back and dialed the sheriff's line while Karen calmly removed her sandals and settled onto a lounge chair like this was already decided. When Deputy Langley arrived 20 minutes later, he recognized me from the call earlier that day. When I showed him the footage and explained what was happening, he asked everyone to leave immediately while he sorted out jurisdictional details. Karen argued, of course, citing community access tradition and unified design zones, whatever the hell that meant. But they left, grumbling, wet, and very, very slow. That night, I uploaded the second video to Facebook with the caption, "Breaking. Cult expands. Invades neighbor's pool under cover of sunset." It got twice as many comments as the first post. 3 days passed with a silence so thick it felt like the HOA had collectively gone into hibernation to recharge their entitlement reserves. No drones, no intrusions, not even a passive-aggressive newsletter in the mailbox. I started to believe, foolishly, that maybe the Facebook blowback had finally embarrassed Karen into retreating. Then I got served. It happened on a Saturday afternoon. Trevor and I were mid-burger at the local diner when a man in a beige vest walked up to our booth and asked if I was Lucas Drake. I nodded. He handed me a thin stack of papers, nodded curtly, and walked out like it was just another stop on his route. I flipped through the packet. Civil complaint for encroachment and misappropriation of common space. Filed by Karen Meadows, president of Sunrise Estates Homeowners Association. There were words in there like historic subdivision rights, unlawful privatization of community-adjacent assets, and my personal favorite, unauthorized pool construction on contested land as per 1986 boundary plans. Trevor looked at me across the booth, eyes wide. "Is she suing you?" "She's trying," I said, pushing the plate aside. I barely made it home before my phone started buzzing. Someone had leaked the filing to the same Facebook group, and screenshots were already circulating. A few neighbors were defending me, others were cautiously neutral. A surprising number seemed unsure which side to take, as if decades-old maps somehow trumped a deed filed in county records and the visible reality of a house surrounded by clearly marked fencing. I called my attorney that evening. Laura Matson had the kind of calm voice that made you think she'd once diffused bombs with a baby in one arm and a martini in the other. She listened without interruption, then said, "Let me guess. The 1986 plat map? How'd you know? You wouldn't believe how many HOAs try to resurrect dead documents when they want to bully someone. Let me get a copy of your survey and title insurance packet." Within 24 hours, she had everything she needed. My purchase was airtight. The land was legally subdivided in 2002. The current boundary lines were recorded with the county and confirmed in a recent title review. But that didn't stop Karen. On Monday, I received a notice from the county court. Until the dispute was settled, a temporary injunction was being placed on the use of the pool, meaning I couldn't use my own goddamn backyard. I stood on my deck that afternoon, staring out at the crystal-clear water I had designed down to the last tile, now off-limits because someone in a pantsuit dug up a 39-year-old plat map and decided to rewrite history. I didn't scream. I didn't flip a table. I walked straight back inside and called the local newspaper. They sent a young reporter the next day, nervous, curious, holding a spiral notebook like it might shield her from neighborhood lawsuits. I gave her everything. The timeline, the videos, the fence lines, the Facebook posts, and the court summons. I handed her a copy of my survey and even offered a tour of the property, complete with laser pointer. She wrote down everything. The story ran 2 days later under the headline, "HOA accused of overreach in pool lawsuit. This is my property, says homeowner." The HOA predictably issued a public statement. It was a word salad of phrases like community values, historical ambiguity, and temporary cooperative limitation. But my favorite line came at the end. "We are committed to preserving neighborly harmony through appropriate legal channels." Meanwhile, I couldn't use my pool. Trevor couldn't invite his friends over, and every time I looked out of the window, I half expected to see Karen standing on the park trail, smirking like she'd just won a round of some twisted board game. But I wasn't playing defense anymore. Laura filed a counter-motion to dismiss the suit based on lack of jurisdiction. She also requested the injunction be lifted on grounds that the original complaint was based on outdated, unenforceable documentation. While the judge reviewed it, Laura began gathering ammunition, a licensed cadastral engineer to do a new survey, an archivist to verify that the HOA map was obsolete, and a digital forensics expert to compare county GIS data with HOA claims. Karen wanted a war of paperwork. She picked the wrong engineer. The county-appointed mediator's office looked exactly how I expected a place like that to look. A beige conference room lit by fluorescent lights that buzzed just enough to make you question your sanity. Across the table sat Karen Meadows, dressed like she was about to audition for a pharmaceutical commercial, cream blazer, pearl necklace, and that smug half-smile that made me want to test the fire suppression system just to break her aura of composure. To her left sat a man named Rick Dunstan, the HOA's attorney. He wore a suit 3 sizes too expensive for a civil spat over pool access. He introduced himself by mispronouncing my last name and pretending not to see my lawyer's extended hand. Laura didn't flinch. She simply pulled out a thick binder labeled Exhibits A to M and set it in front of her like a warhammer. Rick went first. He slid a laminated aerial map onto the table, faded yellowed edges, printed in what had to be dot matrix, with parcel lines that didn't quite line up with modern topography. As you can see, this map from 1986 places the western edge of the Sunrise Estates common use area approximately 15 feet into what Mr. Drake currently claims as his private lot. I leaned in. Currently claims. Rick smiled with all the warmth of a power outage. Yes, based on our understanding, this section of land was erroneously conveyed during a municipal reparceling initiative in the early 2000s. HOA maintains that it was never formally released from community designation. Laura didn't even blink. Is that your position in court? It's our position here. She pulled out a more recent map, color-coded, laser-measured, time-stamped from the county's own GIS system. This is the official cadastral map from the City Planning Office, dated August 2, 2002. It supersedes any and all previous plats. Parcel number 094-717-223 is registered to Lucas Drake, with boundaries certified and approved at the time of subdivision. Rick barely glanced at it. We question the legitimacy of that subdivision. Do you also question the county's approval process? No, Karen interrupted. But we do question the ethics of building a luxury pool directly adjacent to a public trail. It sends a message of exclusion. I raised an eyebrow. Yes, that's the goal. She blinked. Excuse me. It's private property, Karen. It's not exclusion. It's ownership. You're confusing the two. Laura slid another paper across the table. Here's a certified letter from the city engineer confirming that no part of Mr. Drake's property encroaches on HOA land. Furthermore, we've retained a private cadastral specialist who completed an on-site boundary scan using ground-penetrating radar. His findings matched the county's. Karen looked like she just swallowed a wasp. Rick, to his credit, changed tactics. Well, there may be a matter of implied easement. This property borders our public trail, and our clients have used that route for decades. Laura's voice didn't rise, but it sharpened. Implied easement requires long-term continuous adverse use, not a few pool-hopping trespassers who showed up after construction ended. You have no legal precedent. And even if you did, you'd have to sue for access, not ownership, which you haven't. The mediator looked overwhelmed. She scribbled something into her notes, then declared the session suspended pending judicial review. As we packed up, Karen hissed across the table, "You'll regret stonewalling the community." Laura smiled without showing teeth. Only if the community decides to break down the wall with forged maps and bad arguments. We left. Outside, the air was dry and sharp. Laura lit a cigarette she'd been holding like a talisman and stared at the courthouse in silence. "She's not done," she said finally. "She's not trying to win. She's trying to wear you out." "She's picking the wrong guy," I said. The next week, things escalated again. Karen requested a hearing with the city zoning board, claiming I had built the pool in bad faith based on disputed boundaries. She submitted the same ancient map, now blown up onto a foam poster board like she was preparing for a middle school science fair. I showed up with 2 experts and a USB stick full of time-stamped drone footage and digital overlays. The zoning board dismissed the request in under 20 minutes. But Karen wasn't done. The next morning, I found another letter taped to my gate. This one was from the HOA itself, not Karen. It stated that, pending litigation and internal review, members of the Sunrise Estates are advised not to engage with Mr. Drake or his family due to legal sensitivity and the ongoing boundary crisis. Trevor read it aloud and said, "Wow, we're officially radioactive." I chuckled, but inside, I felt the sting. They were isolating us, trying to make us feel like outcasts in our own damn neighborhood, which meant they were nervous. Good. That night, I reviewed the HOA bylaws Karen had tried to apply to me in her initial complaint. Something caught my eye. Section 11.2. Boundary definitions must reflect City Planning Department revisions, as last updated. Karen had shot herself in the foot and handed me the bullet on a legal platter. Laura was going to have a field day. The first time I saw the forged map, I laughed out loud. Not because it was funny, but because it was bold. It arrived tucked inside an email Laura received during discovery. Attached was a clarified parcel boundary map, submitted to the court by the HOA, complete with highlighter marks, a hand-drawn legend, and a red dashed line that conveniently cut directly through the middle of my pool. No watermark, no signature. Just raw, weaponized fantasy. Laura wasn't laughing. "This is either the dumbest move I've seen," she said, zooming in on the file, "or a calculated bluff. Either way, it stinks of desperation." We sent it to the county assessor's office and a digital forensics expert. Within 48 hours, we had confirmation. The map had been scanned from a legitimate archival document, but someone had manually edited the lines using a graphic editing tool, Photoshop to be precise. There were timestamp remnants in the metadata. It wasn't just fake, it was sloppily fake. And yet the court accepted it into evidence as Supplemental Exhibit HOA Exhibit B, just long enough to trigger another hearing. Meanwhile, something else started to stir under the surface. Laura got a phone call from a blocked number. A man introduced himself only as a concerned board member and asked if he could speak off the record. Laura agreed. What followed was a 30-minute call full of long pauses, sighs, and carefully measured regret. The man identified himself as Mark Dixon, one of the newer members of the Sunrise Estates HOA board. He told us that Karen had pressured the board into supporting her lawsuit by claiming she had irrefutable cartographic evidence, and that if they didn't back her, they'd be co-defendants in a cover-up of illegal land transfer. Her words. Dixon had doubts, especially after seeing the clarified map. But the moment he started asking questions, Karen allegedly threatened to bring up compliance irregularities in his own yard improvements. Classic HOA mafia tactics. Still, something had changed. Dixon said he was willing to come forward. The next morning, he showed up at Laura's office with a folder of internal emails printed out and organized. He looked like a man who had finally stopped holding his breath after months underwater. We reviewed everything. There it was, an email from Karen to the board dated 3 weeks before the first lawsuit. The subject line read, "Strategic Community Preservation Plan." In the body of the email, Karen had written, "If Mr. Drake refuses to share access voluntarily, we will need to lean into the ambiguity." As you all know, the historical boundaries are fuzzy enough for us to make a case, especially if we present the right visuals. With a little cleanup and formatting, we can suggest that the original design intent always included that corner lot as community adjacent. Another email, even worse, was titled Escalation Plan, HOA Narrative Control. In it, Karen described steps to recontextualize public perception via Facebook groups, signage, and a visual presence near the disputed border to maintain the illusion of shared space. It wasn't a legal strategy. It was a full-on campaign of engineered confusion. Dixon gave us permission to submit a sworn affidavit. We filed it with the court alongside the forensic analysis of the map file, the GIS overlay debunking the HOA claim, and copies of the emails. And then we waited. The next blow didn't come from the court. It came from Karen herself. Early one morning, a landscaping crew showed up at my gate with a work order. They said they were hired by the HOA to restore compliance aesthetics between the park and my shared-use border. I stepped out in sweats and told them to get the hell off my property. They hesitated. One guy said they'd been told it was community-owned edge landscaping. I showed them the property marker, the court filing, and my phone already dialing the police. They backed off fast. But not before I saw a familiar silver SUV idling across the street. Karen was in the driver's seat, sunglasses on, sipping from a travel mug like she was watching the morning news. The officer arrived 15 minutes later. When I explained what had happened, he sighed and asked if I'd consider filing a harassment complaint. "It's not just a civil issue anymore," he said. "You've got a pattern here." Laura agreed. She filed a motion for sanctions that same day, citing bad faith litigation, evidence tampering, and intentional misuse of legal process. Attached were the fake map, the internal emails, the attempted landscaping stunt, and Dixon's affidavit. The judge scheduled a hearing. 2 days later, Karen called an emergency HOA board meeting. For the first time since this whole mess started, she didn't attend in person. Rumor had it she was scrambling to find a new attorney. Her old one, Rick Dunstan, had filed a notice to withdraw due to irreconcilable differences with the client. Translation, even he had gotten tired of her bullshit. The courtroom was packed. Not in the way you'd imagine for a high-profile trial. No news vans, no national coverage, but with something more local, more personal. HOA board members in stiff polos, neighbors pretending not to stare, and at least 3 people I didn't recognize, who probably just showed up for the drama. Karen wasn't among them. Her new attorney, a young guy named Philip Grant, with the haunted look of someone who'd been thrown into a lion's den with a briefcase full of paper clips, stood alone at her table. Laura leaned over to me and whispered, "This is gonna be short." The judge, an older man with tired eyes and no tolerance for bullshit, opened the hearing by confirming the motion for sanctions. Laura began her presentation with surgical precision, the fake map, the forensic metadata analysis, the GIS overlays from the county, and Mark Dixon's affidavit. She handed out color-printed exhibits like she was passing out candy on Halloween. Then came the emails. I watched the courtroom change as each line was read aloud. Karen's illusion of shared space, her threat to lean into the ambiguity, her declaration that I could be worn down through legal fatigue. There was a sharp inhale from the third row when Laura read that last one. Philip tried to object, claimed the emails were taken out of context. The judge waved him off. "Mr. Grant," the judge said, "your client submitted falsified visual evidence to this court. That is not context. That is contempt." Philip looked like he wanted to melt into the floor. The judge turned to the courtroom and, with the kind of weary gravitas only earned by decades on the bench, began to summarize the situation. He acknowledged that boundary disputes could be complex, especially with older subdivisions and outdated maps. But what he could not tolerate, what the law would not tolerate, was a coordinated attempt to fabricate evidence, mislead the court, and weaponize a homeowners association against a legal property owner. Then he dropped the hammer. The case was dismissed in full. My ownership was reaffirmed. The HOA was ordered to pay my legal fees in their entirety, $95,000 and change. But that wasn't the end. The judge referred the case to the county prosecutor's office for potential charges, evidence tampering, conspiracy to defraud, and malicious prosecution. I didn't move. I didn't cheer. I just stared forward as Karen's entire petty empire started to collapse under the weight of her own ego. After the hearing, people trickled out quietly. A few neighbors nodded at me. One even clapped me on the shoulder and said, "About time someone stood up to them." Laura and I stepped outside into the blinding Arizona sun. "It's not over," she said, "but it's damn close." And she was right. The next week, the HOA board held an emergency meeting. This time, Karen did show up, but only because she'd been summoned. Word leaked quickly. Several board members had turned on her, armed with the same evidence we submitted to the court. They voted to suspend her presidency indefinitely pending legal review. She tried to protest. She even shouted something about entrapment and community betrayal, but no one cared. The best part? The HOA's liability insurance didn't cover fraud. That meant the board had to pull the funds for my settlement and legal fees from their own coffers. Dues, reserves, landscaping budgets, even their slush fund for beautification projects. Suddenly there wasn't enough money to repave the walking trails or plant decorative shrubs. The HOA newsletter went from glossy print to black and white stapled photocopies overnight. And Karen, the county prosecutor, opened an investigation into her actions. Subpoenas were issued. She lawyered up again. Rumor had it she tried to claim the emails were fabricated, but forensic analysis shut that down fast. Meanwhile, Laura filed a separate civil suit on my behalf, this time for defamation and emotional distress. We were asking for punitive damages. And this time, Karen wouldn't have an HOA war chest to back her. She was on her own. Karen's fall wasn't a single dramatic event. It was death by 1,000 revelations, each one chipping away at the illusion of control she'd built over Sunrise Estates. In the weeks after the court ruling, I barely had time to breathe. Reporters showed up at my gate. HOA members tried to distance themselves from her, like rats from a drowning ship. And me? I kept my gate locked and my cameras rolling. The county investigation picked up speed fast. The digital forensic team subpoenaed Karen's personal devices. They found more than just doctored maps. There were emails to a retired city clerk, an old friend apparently, pressuring him to retrieve archive files from a closed records vault. There were spreadsheets with HOA member names and notes like vulnerable to leverage, fence non-compliant, and husband had incident in 19, use it. What had begun as a pool access dispute was now a scandal of HOA-wide surveillance, intimidation, and financial manipulation. The local news ran a special titled, "Poolside Power Trip, How One Woman Tried to Redraw the Neighborhood." Karen went dark. No more meetings. No more newsletters signed with her smug signature. Her house, once the centerpiece of HOA-hosted garden walks, now stood quiet, windows closed, curtains drawn. Some residents claimed they saw her crying in her driveway one morning. I didn't celebrate. Not yet. Then came the audit. A city-mandated independent firm was brought in to review the HOA's finances. What they found blew the lid off everything. 10 years of beautification funds funneled into mysterious consultant fees, phantom construction projects, and, most damningly, a $22,000 expense labeled Community Outreach Initiative, which turned out to be a failed attempt at buying branded patio furniture and umbrellas for a non-existent community pool access program. A program that was never voted on and, in fact, existed only in Karen's email drafts. Half the board resigned within a week. The state HOA Oversight Committee stepped in and recommended dissolution. By the end of the month, Sunrise Estates HOA ceased to exist. In its place, a temporary steering committee was formed, and residents were given the option to vote on whether they even wanted a new HOA. 68% said no. Karen's authority, which once extended like a shadow across every mailbox and lawn border in the neighborhood, evaporated overnight. She was just another homeowner now, with a mounting legal defense bill and a pending civil lawsuit with my name on it. We served her with papers on a Monday morning. She tried to pretend she wasn't home. The process server left the envelope wedged under her windshield wiper. Inside the lawsuit were screenshots, court transcripts, mental health evaluations, and statements from my son's school counselor. All admissible, all part of the claim. We weren't just going for compensation, we were asking for damages. Karen's lawyer filed a motion to dismiss. The judge laughed it out of the room. Twice. My son Trevor asked me one evening, "Is she going to jail?" I shrugged. Maybe. But more importantly, she won't be bothering us again. Good, he said. I like our pool better without spies. He wasn't wrong. I started fixing up the place. Small things. New gravel around the gate. Fresh coat of paint on the back porch. A low privacy hedge going in near the park trail. I installed a facial recognition system for entry access and a perimeter alert that sent updates straight to my phone. And, just for good measure, I added a new sign near the gate. Private property, not part of HO. Trespassers will be sued. It felt poetic. Not long after, I received a letter from the Arizona Today editorial team. They wanted to run a feature on the man who outlasted an HOA. I agreed, under one condition. They had to get every single fact right. No embellishment. No dramatization, just the truth, because that was the thing Karen could never bend or redraw, the truth. And the truth had been mine from the start. A few months later, the neighborhood finally felt quiet again. Not the kind of quiet that makes you nervous, like you're waiting for the next shoe to drop, but the earned kind, like a long-held breath finally exhaled. The pool water was still in the early morning, the surface mirroring the desert sky. No more uninvited guests. No more cameras hiding behind hedges. Just calm. Trevor had gotten back into his swimming routine. He'd started waking up early, goggles on his head, earbuds in, and cannonballing off the shallow end like nothing had ever happened. And maybe for him, it hadn't. Kids bounce back faster, but for me, it wasn't so simple. Even after the HOA was disbanded, after Karen lost her presidency, her status, her lawsuit, and her fake map campaign, I still caught myself double-checking the locks, watching the live feed from the security cams like it was part of my morning coffee. Habits formed under siege don't break overnight, but things changed slowly. The new neighborhood group formed, less of a governing body and more of a casual WhatsApp thread for lost pets and who left the sprinklers on texts. Nobody mentioned dues. Nobody mentioned enforcement. For once, people seemed okay minding their own business. Karen's house went on the market. The listing was sterile, well-maintained colonial with large backyard and proximity to green space. No mention of her reign. No mention of how that backyard had once been used as a command post for a low-grade suburban dictatorship. Last I heard, she moved to Tucson. The civil case settled out of court. Her lawyers must have convinced her to stop bleeding money because she signed the agreement without a fight. No apology, no admission, but the wire transfer came through in full. Enough to cover the therapy, the upgrades, and a week-long father-son trip to Colorado. We went hiking in the Rockies, completely off-grid. I didn't check my phone once. And when we got back, the sign was still there. Private property. Not part of HOA. Trespassers will be sued. Somehow it had never been touched. One evening, while grilling on the patio, a couple from down the street walked by and waved. They complimented the landscaping, asked who I hired for the hedges. I smiled, told them I did it myself, then offered them a beer through the fence. For the first time in a long time, it didn't feel like I was defending a fortress. It felt like I lived here. Later that week, the Arizona Today article came out. The headline read, "The Man Who Beat the HOA, How a Backyard Pool Sank a Neighborhood Empire." They got the facts right, every last one. Laura even smiled when she read it. I kept a copy, laminated it, and tucked it into the drawer under the grill, just in case I ever needed a reminder of what it cost to claim peace. Some people build walls. I built a pool, and in the end, it turned out to be the most effective moat in history.